He never evaded responsibility. He had a sign on his desk. Does anybody remember what it said? The buck stops here. Nowadays, the buck can run all over Washington looking for a place to stop. There's no place to stop. But when I'm elected, I'm going to put the sign back on the desk. And if you visit the Oval Office, I hope many of you will, there's going to be a sign right there that says the buck stops here, because I want people to know who's responsible.
And we are very happy and pleased that not only the buck stops here, but the former President of the United States, the 39th President of the United States, has stopped to visit with us today here on Twin Cities Live, and we are honored, and you are in for a treat. Would you please welcome President Jimmy Carter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good are you? Well, that's the first.
Thank you.
That's the first standing ovation we've ever had for a guest on this show.
Well,
so something a little special. This book is kind of special. It's called An Outdoor Journal, Adventures and Reflections by Jimmy Carter. Why this type of book? Now, a lot of people, I think, are going to be a bit surprised. They would expect, I guess, a former president to always write about government and you know, changing things in the world. This is just a good read to sit down, and if you like the outdoors, which, by the way, you should have been up at Gull Lake the last 2 days. The walleyes were hitting like crazy. You'd have loved it. Why this type of book?
Well, this is the sixth book I've written, and the best one. It's kind of, well, because it's a labor of love. You know, it's something that I wanted to write a long time. It reveals things about me and about my background and experience that no biographer would ever write, and no historian would ever know about. I've written books about peace in the Middle East. I've written books about living a full and expanding life. I've written books about memoirs in the White House and things of that kind. But this one is just a fun book. You know, it's about hunting, fishing, hiking. It's about avoiding the dangers in the woods, getting lost, poisonous reptiles. It's about climbing mountains in the Himalayas and doing some foolhardy things. It's about relationships with my father when I was a child, about relationships with my wife in pleasant outdoor surroundings. It's a philosophical book that shows about me and about the beauty of the earth. I think it would be good even for urban dwellers who never have hunted, never have fished, and don't go outdoors very much.
It does give you a good look, of course, in this state, you know, I mean, fishing and hunting, I mean, that's what Minnesota is all about. You do mention in here that other presidents had hobbies. Eisenhower had his golf. I think you said Coolidge had napping. Ronald Reagan has astrology. I had to slip that in there. I'm sorry. This was too easy. Fishing has this, and we Minnesotans know this because the fishing opener here is the biggest traditional. I think it's bigger than Christmas. Mm-hmm. What is it about fishing that becomes so mystical to someone? Because when you speak of fishing, it's just like it's almost a religion.
Well, it does have, I think, philosophical, even religious overtones. To be isolated, to be put in a position of self-contemplation, a challenging existence in the outdoor environment, exploring new ideas. A fisherman can spend an entire life, 80 years perhaps, and never master the art, and it is an art. I think some of the foremost poetical writing has been about fishing, and it brings out the mysteries of life and relationships among human beings. One of the great unknown things, the major revelation in this book, is not about politics, was that when I was president, I still found time to fish. We had very few secrets that we could keep in Washington. Almost everything was leaked to the press. The only secret that we kept absolutely was my fishing from the White House. We would leave on Friday afternoon, tell folks goodbye, get on a helicopter, fly to Camp David, have a large entourage of news reporters. They would have their cameras focused on me when I got out of a helicopter, hoping that I would fall down the stairs or bump my head. And then when I escaped okay and went to our cabin at Camp David, the news reporters, 50, 100, would go to a nearby motel to spend the weekend. We would change clothes, get back on the helicopter, fly to Pennsylvania, land in an isolated meadow, spend Friday and Saturday night in a little farm cottage alongside Spruce Creek, one of the best trout streams in the world. And then Sunday afternoon, get back on the helicopter, fly back to Camp David, change clothes, get back on the helicopter, meet the press, fly back to Washington. And we did that for 2 years.
And nobody
never knew
ever knew?
Never knew it. It was the best kept state secret that we had.
You mentioned Spruce Creek.
Yeah, Spruce Creek.
You had a lot of great times there, but a lot of humbling experiences. There's something about the outdoors, I don't know what it is, but it really sort of puts you in your place. I don't know.
Well, first of all, there's a challenge to immersing yourself in the out of doors in what could be an alien environment and do it successfully. You can't modify the outdoors to suit your own temperament or your own habits or your own time schedule. You've got to blend in with an environment in which wild animals are at home. So to be a successful fisherman or hunter, or to be a successful outdoorsman or woodsman, or to have a beautiful wilderness experience, you've got to know a little about it. And there is a challenge there. You know, you're testing your own self, your own patience, your own ability, your own strength, your own wisdom, your own sound judgment against a myriad of obstacles. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you don't. But I think the failures, and there are a lot of failures described in this book, can be just as educational and just as enjoyable and just as interesting as the successes.
Don't you find that fishermen and hunters tend to remember the shot they missed or the one that got away more than the fish they actually catch?
Sure. And that's the one they like to talk about as well. It's always a larger one. And quite often that's the case. I have had, as I described in this book, good success fishing. I've caught some large fish, larger than I'll ever catch the rest of my life. But I have been fishing for a steelhead, for instance, in the Queen Charlotte Islands with a fly. And I've had fish take my hook and turn and swim toward the ocean so powerful that there was no way in the world I could have turned that fish around, and just kept swimming right on out to the ocean and broke my pole, broke
with
my
the line,
with everything. And you never stop wondering what in the world that fish would have looked like. Could I have landed it? It may have been a world's record, you know.
How big was he?
How big was it?
You know, growing up in the South in Memphis, see, there's something that we have in the South that Minnesotans aren't really used to, is that when you go fishing in a lake up here, there are no snakes. You don't have to worry about sticking your hand into the water. In the South, it's a totally different situation. There are water moccasins, cottonmouths. I mean, there are lots of snakes. And do you know that we almost lost the president because of a snake?
That's right. Well, you have to be constantly aware of that, both quail hunting and also fishing, quail hunting with rattlesnakes. And there's an episode that occurred last December, as a matter of fact, about a snake, rattlesnake. But the most, I think the most scary experience in our lives was that we built a small pond on one of our farms in Webster County. And I was going over there to inspect it. Rosen was with me. She was pregnant. It was about 2 months before Amy was born, well, now 20 years ago. And we were walking around the edge of the pond. I had a .22 rifle with me, and I was about 20 yards ahead of Rosalind. And I heard her scream. I turned around. She was backed up against some extremely vicious swamp blackberry vines with very heavy thorns. And coming out of the pond, going toward Rosalind, was an enormous water moccasin, a very poisonous reptile. I couldn't get there early enough to kill the snake. It was almost at Rosalind. So I threw the rifle up and fired, and luckily hit the snake and broke its back. And it was thrashing around, still apparently trying to get to Rosalind. And I finally fired a second shot and killed the snake. But it was a petrifying experience. We also thought that Amy was going to be born there on the edge of the pond in front of that water moccasin.
How old is Amy now?
20.
Does that make you feel old? Huh? Does that make you feel old?
Amy's in the Middle East right now. She left Monday. She's trying to bring peace to the Middle East.
Your family, fishing is very much a part of a family tradition here in the state of Minnesota. You and your father was a very important aspect of your relationship. If you could tell me about the one instance where he gave you a responsibility, you were in trout fishing or whatever, to hold on to some fish.
Yeah. Well, Daddy was a hard worker, and he was a very demanding taskmaster. He expected everybody else around him to work hard, including his son. I was his only son then. Billy was born 13 years after I. But Daddy would honor me in a totally different character when we were hunting or fishing together. Daddy would go off every year with a group of men who were his associates in business, and they had a highly competitive fishing trip. 6 men and I. I was about 10 years old. And we would fish in a river, the Little Satilla River down into southeast Georgia. We wade out in the stream. I was barefooted as a child, and cast against the deep bank on the outside of the stream. And Daddy had a long string of fish. He knew he was going to win the competition that day, and he wanted to go across the swamp and talk to some of the other men, so he told me to keep his fish for him. I didn't have on a shirt, but I had on some overall trousers, blue jeans, and I tied the fish stringer to my belt loop. And I caught a big brim, a cottonmouth, a copperhead brim. And I pulled it in. I was so excited to show it to my daddy, and all of a sudden I realized that his fish stringer was gone, and all his fish. So I began to cry. I knew my daddy was a very
he was not going to look
man.
too kindly on this.
Daddy didn't abide mistakes. So I was diving madly in this stream down, trying to find this lost string of fish. And Daddy came back. He said, "What's the matter?" He called me Hot for Hot Shot. He said, "What's the matter, Hot?" I said, "Daddy, I've lost your fish." And he said, "Come out of the stream." So I came out, and I didn't know what to expect. And Daddy looked at me for a long time, and then he put his arms around me and said, "We'll catch some more fish tomorrow." I think that's the closest moment of my life with my father. I almost worshipped him then, but because he protected me, and you know, it's one of those experiences that you never forget. But a lot of the first part of the book about how I learned how to fish, how to hunt, not only with my father, but with my neighbors out in the rural community, most of whom were black neighbors. And that's a part of the book.
Well, you know, your father, bird dogs, you talk about how bird dogs in that community, I mean, they were very valuable.
That's true.
Extremely valuable. And if you lost a bird dog, it was a big tragedy in the family. I mentioned President Reagan's astrology, right, earlier. It says, Daddy was not a superstitious man, but he believed in fortune tellers when it came to finding a lost bird dog. Or at least he did not want to overlook the possibility that they might help. He talks about going to a fortune teller, and I think he paid this lady $1.
That's right.
And
a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, so
Well,
how did this fit in all this? I mean,
well, quite often a good bird dog was worth as much as a farmer could make in an entire year. And if somebody had an outstanding bird dog, you know, it was perhaps the most precious possession. And Daddy lost an excellent bird dog. His name, the dog's name was Lady. And he went to a fortune teller to see if she could give him any advice on how to find a dog. And he let me tag along. And the fortune teller told Daddy a few things about the dog which he wasn't supposed to know. The color of the dog, that was an English setter, and she told him that. And she finally looked at Daddy and she said, "Mr. Earl, you ain't never going to see that dog again." Daddy paid her $1, and we got back in the pickup truck, and we started driving away, and Daddy said, "You know, I expect she's right." And she was. He never saw the dog again. But he just didn't want to overlook any opportunity, you know, to find a dog. Maybe a fortune teller would help.
And we will continue right after this break with former President Jimmy Carter, talking about the outdoors and more right after this.
The means in our hands to solve our national problem. But the most single important thing is for us to have confidence in one another, faith in ourselves, and to be unified in facing the future. You have really thrilled me this morning and inspired me to know that the people in Wabasha have come here, a lot more people than live in Wabasha. I don't know where you all came from. to show that you believe in the strength of our country. How many of you believe that we live in the greatest nation on earth?
President Jimmy Carter taking its trip down the Mississippi River. Watershed. You talk about that trip in here, and that it was a delight for you.
It was. It was one of the most pleasant experiences of my writing life, to finish this book. And of course, it's nice to come back to Minnesota and to hear these tapes. I haven't heard them in a long time. But I did put, by the way, the Buck Stops Here sign on my desk, and it stayed there for 4 years. I inherited it from Harry Truman.
There is a portion in the book, in this state, hunting and fishing plays a very important role in life in Minnesota. But in other parts of the country, there's a lot of controversy, especially revolving around hunting. In fact, you write a paragraph, what about the taking of life? Every hunter and fisherman, I'm sure, sometimes has twinges of uneasiness when a beautiful swift quail or waterfowl is brought down, or when a valiant trout finally is brought to the net. Tell me a little bit about that.
I wanted to write an entire chapter about why people hunt and fish, because this is a difficult question, and some people feel very deeply against, outdoors when about taking of any life of wild animals. The essence of it is that I grew up that way. My parents, my grandparents, my ancestors have always hunted, and it was just like breathing to me, just like being a Southerner or a Baptist, as I put in the book. Also, during the Depression years, this was about our only recreation, was hunting and fishing, in the times we couldn't work in the field. And to add a fresh mess of fish or a quail or a rabbit or sometimes a raccoon or a possum or squirrels to the diet was a very wonderful thing. Also, we looked upon the harvesting of wild animals on our farm the same way we looked on the harvesting of sheep or cattle or whatever. And I think that anyone that has an aversion to hunting, ought to be a complete vegetarian. It's not much difference morally between you taking the life of an animal yourself in a sportsmanlike way, or letting someone else kill an animal and deliver it to your table. The final point is that hunters are the primary conservationists in this country who improve the population of game and also improve the habitat where game can flourish. People who are members of Ducks Unlimited or Trout Unlimited or Turkeys Unlimited not only pay large fees for the privilege of hunting, but also devote a good bit of their lives to promoting the population and protecting that particular species, and also use our influence with legislatures and with governors and with congressmen and so forth to make sure that game laws are enforced and that the population and habitat of wildlife are enhanced.
Yes, I have two questions.
All right.
My first question is that when our present president was in Russia, I didn't see any homeless there, and I was wondering if you felt that we're using all of the resources that we can to solve the problem of people living in the streets. And the second question is, since the Democratic Convention is going to be held in Atlanta, do you see Andrew Young as being a possibility for vice president?
Okay. Well,
let's just turn corners totally here. Go ahead.
one of the major problems we have in our country is the homeless. We've had a dramatic cutback in the last 7.5 years in federal programs for homes, for average families and also for those who are poor. So there's a need to improve that facet of home building. Secondly, most of our homes in our country ought to come from private investors who build homes and sell them or who build homes and rent them. There's a place for private responsibility among all of us in this audience and me. Rosen and I are very active in what's called Habitat for Humanity. We promote the building of homes and actually build homes for poor people in need. Every year we give a week of our lives, a very pleasant week I might say, just being carpenters. We work side by side, Rosen and I do, with power saws, laying down floor, erecting stud walls, putting on roofs, putting up sheetrock, ceiling tile and so forth, and build homes. This month we'll be building 6 homes in Philadelphia and 20 homes in Atlanta in 1 week with all volunteer labor, including the families that will live there. So I think all of us, particularly those in the Twin Cities area, ought to become involved in a project that would be very exciting and very beneficial to help build homes for poor people in need. As far as the other question, I will be a delegate to the convention. I think Andy Young is someone who could very well be considered. This ought to be, though, a highly personal choice of Mike Dukakis. Who would be compatible with him, who would complement his own abilities and fill in some gaps in his past experience. And I think above all, who would help the Democratic ticket win in November. And that's the same kind of factors that I'm sure George Bush will consider on the Republican side. I made an outstanding choice for vice president in 1976 in choosing Fritz Mondale, and I just hope that Mike Dukakis will do as good a job in the next few months.
We had Walter Mondale here not too long ago on the show, and he talked about his fishing and hunting and how it was important to him.
Yes.
Do you talk much at all? Are you in contact with him at all?
Yes, I'll be calling him right after the show, as a matter of fact. Fritz and Joan are very close friends of mine and Rosalind's. I think we got to love each other, really, when we served together for the 4 years and campaigned together, too. Fritz is an avid fisherman. One imbalance in the relationship between me as president and Mondale as vice president is that he could get out of Washington a lot easier than I could. And a lot of times when I thought he was out taking care of state business or something, he was up on the northern lakes in Minnesota catching walleye. I didn't find out all about this until late in our term. But he's invited me to come to Minnesota several times to fish with him, and that's one of the things I have on my agenda for the future. Got to come back for the fishing opener. That would be great. It's just a sight to see 6,000 boats in about a 2-foot area trying to get one walleye. So it's something about that. Go ahead.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Over the years, my husband and I have talked many times about if our children, we have 3 of them, could meet and sit down and talk to one person, it would be you. Because of your experiences, your spirituality, your leadership background. And this book, in fact, has been a delight to me because this kind of does that. This kind of talks to them. But if you had the opportunity, or if they had the opportunity to talk with you, what would you talk to them about?
I think I would describe the many opportunities as a young child to form a closer relationship with your parents in some pleasant environment that's memorable in nature and that can contribute to the growing up of a child and to the learning of one another. It's so easy for a parent, particularly a busy husband or wife, if a wife has a career, to let years go by and never have a really isolated, intimate relationship with the children, where the children would remember it. You know, there's a very difficult gap between generations. But in a fishing boat or alongside a beautiful stream or climbing a mountain or walking through a wilderness area, you know, that's when the barriers are removed. And even grandparents like me can have an intimate relationship with a grandchild. One of the chapters in this book is about my taking my oldest grandson to Alaska for a week. And 10 days ago, my second grandson, James, who was born in the White House, by the way, and I were fishing together in Spruce Creek in Pennsylvania. Well, that's where you can break down the barriers and get to know each other. So I think that's the kind of thing I would advise people to do.
You spend a lot of time in the book talking about, with great fondness, that trip to Alaska with your grandson.
Yes, that's true. Well, I think of all the places in the world, if Minnesotans will excuse my saying so, Alaska is preeminent in outdoors fishing and in natural beauty. One of the things that I was able to do with Fritz Mondale's help is to pass the Alaska Lands Bill, which with the stroke of a pen, after 20 years of work, I might say, we doubled the size of our national parks and tripled our wilderness areas and added 24 wild rivers to be permanently preserved for American people. And I would, you know, if you have the means and the time, I would advise you to go to Alaska and see the beauties of that place. But if you also want to get close to your children or grandchildren, take them on a fishing trip, either to Minnesota or South Georgia would be nice, or Alaska if you can afford it.
And we will continue in just a moment. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Twin Cities Live. We're talking with the 39th President of the United States, Mr. Jimmy Carter. Stand up, sir. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, my name is Matthew Sturgis. I'm from Missoula, Montana, and I teach a high school history course on the presidency. And having an opportunity to study your administration much more closely, I just want to thank you for all you've done for this nation and for what you stand for. I'd also urge you to come out to the Salmon River in Idaho and go for the sturgeon. They're 7 feet long. They take an hour to bring in, and you'll wish you'd never had another bite after a while. But I would like to ask you, Mr. President, what would you say was the most significant accomplishment of your administration, so I can tell this back to my students in Montana?
Okay. First of all, I was able to go down the middle fork of the Salmon just when I was preparing to go to Camp David with Begin and Sadat. And I wanted to get off by myself and clear my mind and do some quiet contemplative analysis of that complicated issue. And I would say that the result of that Salmon River trip was the greatest accomplishment of our administration in international affairs, at least, where we had a successful Camp David talk. The accords were reached, and 6 months later, a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, which is still intact and very beneficial to Mideast peace. I would say that the legacy that might be remembered longest and most effectively would be the Alaska Lands Bill that I mentioned earlier, where we were able to repeat myself, to double the national park system and triple the wilderness areas of our country. I think that will increasingly become a thing that Americans appreciate most.
Some of the Mississippi River fishermen, you might want to know this. You're talking about sturgeon. The president here did a little carp fishing in China.
Yes, yes, of course. Whenever we go to a foreign country, usually on business, we study ahead of time to find a half day or maybe a day and a half at the most that we can slip off from conferences and slip off from lectures and business affairs and do some quiet fishing. Where we went in China, which was near Xi'an, there were not any trout streams, so we went out on the side of lakes and we fished with the local Chinese for carp with a cane pole and a silk line and handmade hooks that didn't have any eyes on them even. They tied the line around the shank of the hook, and the carp sometimes were 10, 15 pounds. So you would put a tiny bit of dough on the hook, fish for the carp, it would have just a bobble, and all of a sudden the carp would start swimming off. And if it was a 10 or 15 pounder, they would either break your line or break your pole. And the Chinese fishermen were very patient. They would just break the line and they would put on another line, and after a while they'd catch a 3-pound carp and they could land it. So I would advise you all, whenever you travel overseas to China or to Switzerland or to Wales or to New Zealand, to find a time to fish for a few days. It would add a lot to the trip without taking away from the business nature of it.
A big part of being in the outdoors is it's sort of a chance to reflect on your life. We have a tendency when we're fishing, whatever, just kind of think about things. When you've been in the outdoors, you have a new cabin that you built up in the mountains in Georgia.
Yes.
Do you think back on your presidency and some of the trying moments? So many things have changed, then again, so many things haven't. The Russians are out of Afghanistan, yet the Middle East still remains a very troubled area. Do you reflect back on some of the moments that were very trying for you?
Yes, you do. One of the reasons we built the mountain cabin, which is just a tiny log cabin, it's 30 by 30 and totally isolated right alongside a beautiful little rainbow trout stream, was so that we could get away from visitors, even neighbors and kinfolks. A lot of people come to the Plains as tourists, and just have some moments of quiet reflection. And when I've written my other books, and particularly this one, it tends to clarify your thoughts and let your memories be more vivid. And I think it contributes to better writing and maybe better plans for the future.
Hello. When you were president, you formed a commission on world hunger, and one member which you appointed was John Denver. And I'd appreciate your comments on what you think of his most recent proposal, how we could end world hunger. If the U.S. were to cut their defense budget by 1%, we would save roughly $300 million a year, and if the Soviet Union were to follow that, that would be like an international fund to end world hunger. And I'd like to hear if you think that's possible.
Okay.
I think it's admirable and would be a tremendous contribution. I think the possibility would depend on the leadership that we'll have in Washington in the next 4 years. I don't know how to assess Gorbachev, but I think he has brought a breath of fresh air to the Soviet Union. And if we have a similar breath of fresh air in Washington, I think it might very well be possible to do some innovative and exciting things of that kind. The Carter Center, by the way, has some remarkable projects, particularly in Africa, where starvation takes place, headed by a man who spent a lot of time in Minnesota, Dr. Norman Borlaug. Dr. Borlaug and I are partners, and we're teaching very small farmers in Sudan, Ghana, Zambia, and other countries to rapidly increase their production of food grain with a very low cost And we can quadruple the production of millet or sorghum or maize just by using the right kind of seed and a moderate amount of fertilizer. So I think this is the kind of effort that the U.S. government and the Soviet Union might very well join in as a partnership as we see expenditures for weapons of all kinds go down. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. President. Welcome to Minnesota. A couple of questions. One is, how is your brother doing? And the second one is, are you aware of any progress being made in the solving the problem of acid rain that's killing the fish and causing so many problems with the environment?
Okay. Billy's doing fine. He still has pancreatic cancer, which, as you know, is one of the most deadly of all cancer types. He has volunteered lately to be, you might say, a human guinea pig. There is an experimental program in the National Cancer Institute to use a substance called interleukin-2 in the treatment of the body's immune system to make it more active and more eager to fight against cancer cells. Billy has just finished his first treatment, and he's on the way home today, as a matter of fact, from Bethesda Hospital in Washington. He is the first pancreatic cancer who's ever been treated with this substance. So there's no way to predict if it will be successful at all. But Billy has a great sense of humor. He's fighting his disease very well. He has the prayers, you know, of a lot of people, and we hope that he will be benefited from this program. As far as the acid rain question is concerned, I don't want to be political on this program, but we've had a horrible experience in the country in the last 7.5 years in environmental quality, personified, I think, by James Watt's attitude as a Secretary of Interior, and by President Reagan's belief that pollution comes from trees. This has led to every year a request that the expenditures on national parks be drastically reduced. And the Environmental Protection Agency has been very seriously damaged. The Council on Environmental Quality has been destroyed. We've had excessive sale of offshore drilling rights and a dumping of a national forest sales on a market that doesn't need additional timber sales. And as you know, this administration has also refused to deal with the acid rain problem, continuing to say, well, we need a few more years of study. In the meantime, our forest lands are suffering. Even the southern pine forests are dying in an unexplained way, probably from acid rain. Many of the lakes, not only in Canada, but also in the northeastern part of our country, are dying from acid rain. And I think this is another challenge that I hope the next president will meet courageously. Whether it's George Bush or Mike Dukakis, it doesn't matter to me as far as this is concerned. Environment ought to be restored as one of the major issues of our national agenda.
When we come back, I'd like to talk to you about how the outdoors plays a role in your relationship with your wife. It's very important to you, and what your children are doing, and if you've passed on the love of the outdoors to your children, especially maybe to Amy. I know everybody wants to hear about Amy. We'll continue in just a moment right after this. Welcome back. Talking with former President Jimmy Carter about the outdoors. Go ahead.
Hi. My question is, I don't fish at all. I have 2 sons who are interested in fishing, and I want to know, how do I develop a way to fish? I'm very squeamish about it. And also, I'd like to know what's the best way to cook.
You mean you don't like leeches?
No. I can't even put the worm on the hook. And I have a daughter who I don't want to have that problem with the kind of family I have. So I'd like to know, how do you get a little one interested in fishing, and what's the best way to prepare fish?
Well, if you've got a friend who's a fisherman, or maybe your father, I don't know your status in life, that's one way to circumvent the squeamishness that you have. Also, most fishermen don't use worms. Some do, some don't. But with a fly rod, you only use a tiny, dry fly or wet fly, and the increasing habit, at least among American fishermen, is to release all the fish you catch, particularly trout. Rosa and I will fish all day and release the fish that we catch, maybe keep 1 or 2 if we want a particular meal. In fact, about 2 weeks ago, we went bass fishing for largemouth bass in a pond near our home with fly rods. And we caught about 35 bass. We kept 1 large one for supper that night, and we released all the rest of them. I might add parenthetically that Rosalind caught 6 bass before I caught my first one, and which is typical for our fishing experiences. But there are a lot of ways that you can let your kids benefit from the outdoors and from fishing without having to kill the fish if you don't want to do that, or without using worms or anything like that, or leeches.
Now, you did mention something there, that your wife has a tendency to catch more fish than you do. Your mom also did the same, did she not?
That's right. I've had trouble in competing with the women in my family fishing. They're either better fishermen than I am, which I hate to admit, or they're permanently luckier. I don't know which.
How do you compare yourself to your father as far as passing on your love of the outdoors to your children? Have your children caught the same excitement about it?
I don't know that any of my 3 sons are as avid outdoorsmen as I am. But they've grown up on the farm, in the farm environment in Plains. And when they were still fairly young, though, I went into politics. And they were engaged in my campaigns, later moved to Washington and Atlanta. And they were taken away from the farm, where I stayed there until I went off to college when I was 18 years old. But now I find that when they come home on vacation, which they do quite often, we either go quail hunting or fool with the bird dogs, or go out fishing. And when we go to Pennsylvania fly fishing, it's kind of a central location, because I have one of my oldest sons with 2 children lives in Chicago, 2 of them live in Atlanta, and they all are good fly fishermen. The most pleasant thing in my life right now is teaching my grandchildren. I've kind of forgotten sons, but now my grandsons and granddaughters are the ones that I'm concentrating on. And there's a delightful chapter in the book, I think, about my experiences with my oldest grandson in Alaska, not only fishing, but also seeing grizzly bears close up, unfortunately, and bald eagles and moose and caribou and so forth, and getting him acquainted with fishing. And 2 weeks ago, I had my second son on Spruce Creek learning how to fish. So I think that there's a generational gap that can be closed by that fact. The last chapter in the book, I tried to refer to I think the second chapter in Ecclesiastes, when a beautiful extraction from the Bible, from the Old Testament, about how things go in cycles, and the transient things in human life that quite often are frustrating and disappointing and lose value, are totally transcended by the permanent things in life, the things that don't change. Truth, honesty, peace, compassion, love, beauty. I think it's a very fine way to meld a good philosophy in the outdoors with your children.
Now, many times in this state, we talk about fishing widows. In fact, I saw a hat the other day when I was up fishing. It says, "My wife says she's going to leave me if I don't stop fishing," and underneath it says, "Gee, I'm going to miss her." You and your wife, it's very important to you, the time you spend outdoors.
Yes, it is. Rosen doesn't hunt. Sometimes if we're hunting on horseback, she rides horseback with me, but she doesn't like to shoot. But she is an excellent runner. We run 3, 4, 5, 6 miles together. We play tennis together. We go downhill skiing, cross-country skiing together. We ride bikes together. But I think the thing that we do together that's most enjoyable is fishing, either in a small farm pond for bass, largemouth bass, or in trout streams all over the world.
Doesn't matter to you what fish it is or whatever. It's just being by the water.
That's right. And I think one of the things that's most enjoyable with cold water fish is that the place is always beautiful. You know, you're quite often in mountains, in free-flowing streams is what I prefer, and you have to be isolated, you know, to enjoy it. There are times when you're crowded, as you said before, like opening day, but I try to wait until after opening day to get out. And there's something of a competition between me and Rosen about who can catch the largest fish or the first fish or the most fish, a competition that I would hate to reveal the end of on this program. But in order to stay even with Rosen, I have to fish more hours and fish a lot harder.
We'll take a break. When we come back, it is the 4th of July. I'd like to get your comments on that as a former president of the United States when we continue with Twin Cities Live right after this. Welcome back to Twin Cities Live. It is the 4th of July, and I wanted to ask you, Mr. Carter, how you think patriotism, the level of it, is in this country today. Is it coming back? Is it changing? Is it less than what you'd like it to be? The 4th of July, do you?
I think that our nation has been through some terrible ordeals in the past, with the assassination of John and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., the Vietnam War, Watergate revelations, the Iran-Contra scandals. But the 4th of July comes along, luckily, at a time every year when people are out of school, they have time to contemplate, the families are generally together, or often together. And it serves a very useful purpose of reminding us about, as I said earlier in the program, things that don't change. What our nation is, what it stands for: freedom, liberty, basic human rights, the promotion of the rights of others, freedom of expression. So I think that the 4th of July should be a time of quiet contemplation, what our country means to us, and as John Kennedy said, what we can mean to our country.
Well, this is a uniform you're quite familiar with, having
Yes,
spent time in the Navy. Go ahead.
Ensign Colson, sir, I had 2 questions. One, you were talking about fishing and hunting overseas in different countries and things. How hard is it to really get, you know, the authority and stuff to go fishing? I don't assume you just can't walk out and start shooting their deer. The other question is, how did your perceptions change and stuff going like from the Navy and into the government and the president, and then afterwards, how the perception of what things going on, how's that changed?
Did you go to Annapolis?
Yes, sir. I graduated this year, sir.
Wow, just a child. Well, one of the great experiences in my life was going to Annapolis and graduating. I served 11 years in the Navy, most of it in submarines. And this is a very difficult life, as you know, but I think it prepared me well for a future career in business, first of all, and then in state and national politics. I think it also reminded me of the responsibilities we have, not only just to be prepared for combat, but to use the strength of our nation for peace, not only for us, but around the world. I found it fairly easy when I was in the Navy to continue my outdoor experiences. You know, we traveled all over the world. I was almost always at sea. I never had a good shore duty assignment when I was in the Navy. But even then, I would go out at night, for instance, and fish for striped bass in the Thames River and off the coast of New England. And even when I was cruising in the Pacific one time on a submarine, we spent most of our hours on the surface, particularly at night. I was on night duty one night on the midwatch, tired and sleepy and thinking about the beauties of mountain streams and so forth. All of a sudden I was shocked when something struck me on the arm. I was about 15 feet above the sea level, and a heavy thing hit me on the arm. I couldn't believe it, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And I looked down at my feet, and there was a large flying fish flopping around on the conning tower. Well, the weather was very calm, and so the next night I talked to the captain. I was a lieutenant junior grade then. And I said, "Captain, why don't we try to have a flying fish supper?" And he said, "You must be out of your mind." And I said, "No, if you would let me, we'll open a hatch on the submarine deck, and we'll put up a white screen, like a movie screen, and we'll shine a light on it, and maybe the flying fish will go into the screen." Well, sure enough, we did that the next night, and we had about 50 flying fish, and had a wonderful fresh fish supper on the USS Pomfret back in 1948, long before you were born, probably. But so you can, if you're innovative, you can find a way to enjoy the out of doors.
How did it taste? Was it good?
They're delicious. Yeah, one of the most delicious fish there is.
Go ahead.
Thank
Hello.
you very much for your question.
Hello, I'm not interested in fishing or the outdoors until today when I heard about your book. And I'm very interested in it because it does include more about family. And of course, those are values for all of us. And my question is, I want to know a little bit more about your daughter Amy, because I have some of the values that she does. I'm very concerned about our policies of South Africa, as I know Amy is, and especially Central America. For myself, I've been very involved in those issues. And so I'd like to know what Amy's doing, and if you would speak a little bit about those world issues.
Fine. As parents, Rosa and I have had mixed emotions about Amy. She's much less orthodox, you might say, than we are. But I have to say that Amy has not been arrested lately. She's been arrested 4 times, as you may know, 3 times for demonstrating about apartheid in South Africa. And 1 time she was arrested for demonstrating against the CIA activities in Central America, the illegal activities of the CIA. And we're very proud of Amy. By the way, she was found innocent of any crime by a jury that Amy pointed out, all of whom were over 30 years old. Amy continues to be interested in promoting world peace and dealing with human rights violations. Only recently, Amy was in the Middle East to meet with Israeli officials of all political persuasions, to spend a good bit of time in the West Bank and Gaza, to visit the Egyptians, the Jordanians, and the Syrians. I think it's not inaccurate for me to say that of all the college-age students, Amy is perhaps the best known and one of the outstanding leaders, and I think expresses principles of which I'm very proud. And we hope that Amy will continue. This fall she'll be going to an art school. She's become increasingly interested in art, particularly the craft side of art. And she'll be going to Memphis to an art institution there. But Amy will continue, I think, her activity as a young person, trying to promote the finest ideals of our country, as her older brothers did during the time of Earth Day and civil rights and the Vietnam War.
And we will continue in a moment. We'll be right back. Well, if you like the outdoors, and even if you have never experienced the outdoors, it's definitely a book I think you should read by Mr. Jimmy Carter, An Outdoor Journal. One final question, only about 30, 40 seconds. What are you going to be doing in the future? Just continue to write books and speak out on certain issues?
I'll continue to teach. I'm a distinguished university professor at Emory in Atlanta, Emory University. And we have, as I said earlier on the program, a wide range of projects in Asia and Africa to alleviate hunger and also to promote better health care. And I'll play some limited role in international peace efforts. In fact, I do that now. But, and I hope I'll have time to do a little hunting and fishing, but I'll continue to write books as well. They've all so far been bestsellers. I think this one will be too, and Rosen's been #1, by the way, bestseller, her book.
You've never had a #1 bestseller, have you?
No, just my wife has had a #1.
Accommodations for guests on Twin Cities Live, provided by the new Whitney Hotel, located city side of the Mississippi overlooking St. Anthony Falls. Henderson chauffeured Cadillacs provide limousine transportation for the guests of Twin Cities Live. Henderson's offers the largest selection of color, style, and service in the 5-state area. Bob Bruce's wardrobe is provided by Cedric's International Fashions and Furs for men and women, located in the Galleria. Hair and makeup provided by Take 5, 504 North 1st Avenue in the Butler Building.
Once again, the book is called An Outdoor Journal, Adventures and Reflections by Jimmy Carter. Just a personal invitation, if you're ever in the neighborhood, I got a pound of leeches in the fridge. We'll go for walleyes whenever you want. And also on a serious note, I think all of us in the audience and all of us in this country, there were many ups and downs during your presidency, but one thing above all, we appreciate your service to our country and what you did for us. Thank you for being with us today.